Right now, we're going to get into a very special interview. This is actually my second interview with this awesome artist. We did a live stream thing. It was almost like a precursor to this podcast in a lot of ways. With this artist who I've met in the online space, specifically Instagram, through various posts about retro and retro music and what does retro even mean anymore. The wonderful, the insightful, the philosophical SNS Sensation, Sebastian Muravchik. Sebastian, my friend, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks so much for having me in your podcast. I'm very excited and looking forward to it. Yes.
Absolutely. So let's get into it because you recently dropped a track called Same River Twice, which I think, in my personal opinion, is maybe my favorite thing you've ever done. I think, and that's saying something. I've really enjoyed, working, listening to your tracks, but also working with you. Obviously, we did, in case for people who are listening and don't know, we did a kind of a remix swap last year. I remixed your track, Amor Fati, and you remixed our track Alien Life, and that was a really cool experience, trading that back and forth in our different approaches to the songs. But yeah, Same River Twice, I just really enjoyed the instrumentation and the subject matter of the song, and how you go into these kind of philosophical concepts, and you can tell there aren't any empty calories in your music and your lyrics, and I really like that, and I really appreciate that. It makes me want to go deeper and learn more about philosophy than I know. I took a couple of philosophy classes in college, and I took in some of the concepts, some of the material, but I am by no means an expert. So it's really cool to get kind of introduced to that. It's kind of your music, I hope, can be kind of like a gateway drug to that kind of stuff. But
that would be amazing. Yeah, that would be ideal. Yeah.
But I guess talk to me about where that idea for Same River Twice, where did the whole germ of that song come about?
Well, it's a funny one because obviously it's very heavily inspired by and based on philosophy, but the way I arrive at all of this philosophy is not my work is sort of connected to philosophy, deeply connected to philosophy, but it's not philosophical work. It is musical work, and it's poetic work. Poetry is at the heart of what I do, in music and my videos, and also in the way that I approach poetry. Approach philosophy, because the philosophy that I am more fond of, or more attracted to, or more get more into and read more about and get to know more and more about with the years, is philosophy that is the kind of philosophy that is more linked to poetry. And you could perhaps say that there are two kind of strands of philosophy. One of it is the more philosophical philosophy, where philosophical points are made, and they can be quite complex to understand, but they are in the end they are about, for example, if it's ethics, if the ethics branch of philosophy, then you have to make a very clear ethical point, and you take an ethical position and so on. And now and that would be the more kind of mainstream, if you want to call it, line of philosophy, which kind of starts with Plato's rendition of Socrates, and then follows through Aristotle, and there's a whole kind of line there, and it's all very, very interesting, but only from my point of view, it's mainly interesting in the way that it kind of can kind of derail itself. And then there's the other line of philosophy. This is obviously a bit of a reduction, but overall, there's kind of a line which embraces the ability of philosophy to derail itself, and sort of embraces the poetic aspect of it. The fact that for example, when something is written in a very complex way, it isn't just to make it difficult. It actually isn't to make it difficult, but rather to make it, enable it, allow it to open up. I guess my journey starts with post-structuralism, with French post-structuralism, and particularly with Deleuze and other authors that I kind of half understand, I would say a quarter understand, and mostly they are kind of impossible to understand. And understanding what they're writing isn't really about saying this is what they are actually saying, but rather having a deeper sort of understanding of where they're coming from. With the Deleuze, for example, it's very difficult because the guy was a walking encyclopedia of philosophy, and he, there's this whole school in France in the 60s and the 70s where they kind of learned the original languages so that they could read the texts in the original Greek or the original German and so on. I have no idea what. I don't think they did much else. I think this is all they did. This is all they did. These people, yeah. But the point being that, on the one hand, he was a total expert, and he's referring in an obscure sort of way to concepts that you come across later on as you're reading some other philosophy. I read a little bit of Kant, and I don't particularly love it, but it is very important in the kind of development of it. And then by reading Kant, I realized that even though Deleuze doesn't align himself at all with that line, he knows it thoroughly, and this is very complex. There's a lot to know. So from my side, I'm a musician and I'm an artist. I'm not like a scholar. So when you say I'm not an expert on philosophy, yeah, but neither am I. I mean, we're musicians. We make music. We're songwriters. We're pop songwriters. But the thing that does inspire me about this whole thing, whether it's philosophy, music, images, and so on, is the poetry of it, the openness of it, because everything feels rather closed. So the project, SNS Sensation, over the months has kind of revealed itself to be an existentialist project. So I was interested in what Juliet was saying before about trying to find meaning. I guess existentialism comes from a point of view that there is no meaning. So that's kind of why I was saying that your project with the study of coincidence was so hopeful, and there was this real sense that you could find that meaning, that you could find, I suppose, more depth, but also meaning. There's that ultimate kind of end line in the project where you find that meaning. In existentialism, there is no hope, and there is no possible. That's why I always insist on the impossible, on aiming for the impossible, because the freedom will come through the poetry of failure. That's it's all about poetry in the end. It's not really philosophical in the most philosophical sense, but basically, Same River Twice, you were asking, deals with the fascination that I have for pre-Socratic philosophy. These philosophers, there's very little that survived from their writings, and they all wrote before Socrates, obviously. And with Socrates, sort of philosophy as we know it kind of starts, but there were amazing contributions before that. And particularly fascinated, I've been fascinated for many, many years with Heraclitus, who wrote before, and he was absolutely insane. He died covered in cow shit because he believed that he knew better than his doctor, and that covering himself in cow shit would cure him of his disease. And all it did was made his death all the more amusing. But on the other side of that debate, there's Parmenides. So there's this whole Heraclitus versus Parmenides, and generally they are meant to be opposed to each other. One of them says, that you cannot step into the same river twice, because the second time you step on it, the river has changed and the person has changed. So everything is constantly changing and becoming. Whereas Parmenides says nothing can ever change, because if it isn't now, why would it be later? That is a contradiction in terms. It's illogical. That which is not cannot be. he says. So it's a really interesting kind of take on it. So it says that change, time, and so on is all an illusion, a trick in the mind. But there is no change. The universe is, there's no time. Everything is happening at the same time. The future and the past, everything just is one thing. And so, those things are completely fascinating to me. But before they are fascinating as ideas, they are fascinating as a time. We talked about retro and we say going back to the 80s. Well, actually, yeah, we have this myth of the 80s.
Yeah.
But I have my myth of those pre-Socratic times before there was even Socrates, and these people were just walking around the markets and just chatting, and I don't know, it just, how do you, it's just that nostalgia,
it's interesting how I'm hearing you talk about the whole same river twice. You can't step in the same river twice. You can't be in the same time twice, which is very interesting now that I'm thinking about it, how that applies to the whole, synth-wave, retro-wave scene, if you want to call it that, how it like,
yeah,
it's like it's inspired by a time in music and it's inspired by a time in like cinematic and pop music and all that, but like it both is and isn't trying to recapture that vibe. Like I hear so many people who either are fans of the genre or make music in the genre that, oh, I listen to this song and I get, a lot of them were like born after the 80s. A lot of them were born like in like 1990 and after, and are like, I listen to it and it gives me nostalgia for a time I was never there part of. And I'm thinking to myself, like, but that's not really nostalgia. Like, is it? Like it's escapism. It's not really nostalgia. It's like they're, and also the whole synthwave version of the 80s is a very fantastical, it's a version of the 80s that never really existed. So it's very interesting in that way of like, yeah, like you can't,
I think,
go ahead.
sorry, no, I'm just I was thinking, I have actually spoken in the exact same words that you've spoken in the just now in the past. This nostalgia for this time. I am massively nostalgic for New York in the late 70s. In the mid 70s, and obviously never remotely being there or anything. I was in Buenos Aires, was born in Buenos Aires, and I didn't go to New York until I don't know, the late 80s or early 90s, or late 80s, I think. But it's when I was a child, but it was I didn't get, yeah, anyway. But the point is, yeah, I still am nostalgic, and I do think that you can call it nostalgia, though. I wouldn't say it's escapism, because it hurts when you escape. Escapism is generally meant to be, you have this pain and you kind of trying to evade it. We actually are attracted to this pain of this craving for a time that we can never access. Yeah. At the same time, sorry, carry on.
I don't know. I feel like it's kind of both. Like there are some people who, like you say, are like they are yearning for a time they can't, like, yeah, are wallowing in the pain of it. But there are other people who it is very much an escapism thing. And I think like it's like I don't want to say the whole appeal of it is because our time sucks right now, like especially ever since this whole pandemic and everything. The last few years of just not been a lot of people, have not been have not felt like the best time, and the world really has felt like the world is falling apart. And maybe that's not in the entire, I don't think that's the entire appeal of the genre, of the obsession with the retro, but I think it kind of feeds into it a little bit. But yeah, that's kind of the escapism aspect of it, is kind of what our song Infinite Transit is about. Beautiful, in a sense. It's really comes from that, is inspired by that feeling I get listening to music in the car by myself. Roll the windows up, you can blast the music as loud as you can, and it takes me away somewhere else. It feels like a very out of body experience. And that's really the power of that, and the that you can create your own world around you. Even when you're driving in a car, you are clearly Your body is in a certain time and place in this earth, in this universe, in this timeline, but you're also somewhere else at the same time, and that's kind of where I was going with Infinite Transit. So
That's cool. I didn't know that. I really like that tune a lot. So yeah, cool. There's a lot of that I think in your
Also,
music.
when I first listened to his lyrics for Infinite Transit, I thought he was talking about death and the afterlife.
Ah,
And there was a friend of ours that passed away just a couple of years ago, um, and it really made me think of that friend whose name was Tony, who was a big fan of Remy and Remy's writing and his vocals, what he brings to the project. And I was imagining him in the afterlife listening to this track getting released that felt like it was about, because it is about both states. He was about being present physically and about being somewhere else, getting beyond it with our consciousness, with our awareness, like, and that is one way to look at life beyond physical life. If there's consciousness and awareness on the other side, that there's,
yeah,
you can turn and don't look back again, the voices say. You know, that's one of the lines that repeats in it, you know, turn and don't look back again. Yeah. And it made me think of, you know, when we leave our life, when we depart for whatever's next, you know, the voices might say, don't look back again, come forward, come into the next place. And so it's interesting because with art there's all these layers. There's what inspired the poet to put those words together, but how they respond or resonate or affect people that are listening to us, we never have any control over. And people that are interested can watch things like this and learn more about like the stories behind the music, and then see layers of meaning, because they'll still have their own layer of meaning of whatever it is, you know, because even in like the same river twice, you're kind of referring to another person. And I couldn't tell if you were referring to a lost love or if you're referring to a historical figure. You know, it's up to me to decide who the who the singer is singing to in Same River Twice. You know, it's ambiguous. I listened to it a bunch of times and I was like, I really can't tell. I can't tell if he's trying to tell me about the story of a lost love or not. Like there was something about it that felt like, felt kind of haunted, and coming from the heart in some way, like very full of feeling.
yes.
But I couldn't understand exactly what the story might be for the person that wrote it. So then it's just, you know, then I just get to kind of invent, you know, whatever I think it's going to be. Although we're actually talking, so you can clear up my misunderstandings. But generally, people don't get to talk directly to every songwriter.
yeah.
But the thing is, the fun. There's so much to say about what you just said, but mainly yes is the word. Yes to all, and to me, the stage. I've been writing songs for a very long time, and songwriting has been my life, really. As an artist, it's been the main thing in my life. Everything else is secondary, really. We were talking about that the other day on the chat with Remy. But that's the stage that I'm in now. The way that you perceive the song, everything that you just described, is the ideal thing for me to for the listener to go through, to be able to engage in the story, but to be able to be given the space to define the story for themselves, to connect with. But this is a difficult thing, and this is something that you really do develop with years of songwriting, which is the ability to be honest but open, because you can be open in an artificial way. You can just give some hints of a story, and then it's up to you, and that's a little joke. But this is no joke. There's genuine feeling, and that's, I think, what you connected with, the feeling of loss, of gradual loss. Now, is that a love story? Is that the mirror? Who is the other person? You know, that's I think it's all of the above, as we said. No, yes to all. Mm-hmm. But it's very genuine. I don't need for things to be fully defined to feel very strongly about them. There's a deeper truth about the way that we experience our life, our emotional life, which doesn't need to be defined by facts or by definitive facts, but there's an experience of loss, there's an experience of love. And yeah, I think you totally. I mean, I'm very, very pleased to hear that you engage with the song to that level, you know, because it's really what it's meant to be. But you know, it's difficult to yeah, it's a very saturated world, you know. But I guess, you know, it's part of what's great about the relationship we've established with between SNS and Unheard, is that yeah, we also kind of really engage with the songs. I was really I really enjoy Unheard Sirens songs. I think they're wonderfully written and produced and sung. All of the songs that I've heard so far, you know, from the album, and you released them as singles and then they came out as album. But the last one, what's it called again? With the video that you just talking about. The reach. You know, that's really powerful, that stuff. That's really makes me think about kind of the Detroit and perhaps early 90s warp kind of sound, techno kind of sound. But mainly I'm thinking of Detroit, you know, in the late 80s, and this kind of feeling of yearning and loss. That's really that's very much up my street, and you could probably hear that in my songs too. And I was just thinking that it is a fascinating thing, and I don't know if you and I, Remy, have spoken about this before, but we seem to arrive at similar places with a very, very, very different journey.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's philosophical or is based on the way that you're working on the ideas and the research that you're doing on other areas, we arrive at a very similar place, and that's fascinating. That's another coincidence for me to study, I think.
Yeah, especially when we get to talking about the meaning of the songs, we find that there's a correlation there, because like we have very different approaches to it. We have very different sonic approaches and stuff like that, but like, I mean, I suppose we both kind of play in the arena of like synth pop and synthwave and or retro music, if you want to call it that. We're on that radio station. We're on that same wavelength, but we have two very different approaches to it. But yes, it's been like really cool, like, and fascinating to hear those similarities. And we were talking about this. We've been talking about this off and on for months, but like one of the big things that connects both of our projects, both Unheard Sirens and SNS Sensation, is that theme of freedom, and that theme of like true freedom, and what does that mean, and how many people are ever like truly free. Which I heard. I don't know if you're familiar with the artist Youngblood.
Oh yeah, I haven't. I know the name, but I've not.
Yeah,
really...
he was. I was watching like a. They've been these, obviously, you know, David Bowie is my favorite artist of all time. So I've been watching like these little featurettes that have been coming out, these David Bowie is things that have been coming across their official channels, where they have like artists like talk about the impact that David Bowie has had on music and stuff like that. And one was Youngblood, and he was talking about like, it's the hardest thing in the world to be yourself. To be yourself, like without the influence of anything else, not trying to be like, there's so many people who are like trying to fit into a certain box of like, I'm, you know, whatever, you know, I'm male, I'm female, I grew up, you know, in Puerto Rican, whatever, you know, nationality, or, you know, by race or by gender, or they try to fit into certain boxes based on like upbringing and socialization. They try and fit into whatever. If you know, look at both of us, we clearly don't want to fit into, you know, any particular boxes. We like to, you know, we're trying to be ourselves as much as we possibly can be. So I just find that fascinating, and that's the themes I keep coming back to over and over and over again. Is how do you become closer to truly being yourself without copying something else or trying to like imitate something else just to feel, I don't know, accepted or feel valid in some way. So,
and there's another aspect as well that I think we both coincide, both bands, is and that is that it's freedom and death. We're both very, very deeply concerned with death in a very different way. You think about the past lives and the eternal life that you're looking forward to, whereas I think about death as a philosophical portal towards freedom. It's the same freedom that we're seeking, but that freedom is sort of defined in terms of our ideas around death.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it's awesome to hear you pick up on that, because that's definitely, that it is definitely there, but it's not something I've like consciously thought about. But 100%, like, if there's anything that like keeps me going, it's the fact of knowing that death is coming. It's the fact that knowing that eventually it's going to end. And I wouldn't say it, I could just say, like, I fear death, but like, sure, but it's not even so much that. It's not even so much that I fear my own death or our own deaths. It's that my main fear is dying too early before I've had a chance to like do certain things. It's not the fact the story is going to end. It's, I don't want the story to have a really crappy ending, if that makes sense. Like,
it makes perfect sense
prematurely.
It makes perfect sense, but at the same time, well, the way that I go about things, you can probably tell that it's getting darker and darker with this sensation. And
different time zones, it happens. It is what it is.
Judging by the new sketches, it seems to be continuing that direction. But Amor Fati is a moment that I found of great joy around the same kind of philosophical ideas. But but basically within this darkness, what I see is that if you do seek that freedom as relentlessly as Unheard, Sirens, and SNS Sensation are doing, you will find most likely, it's hard to say because we're not there yet, but you will probably find that it will always be too early. Because that freedom, that when you do chase it properly and when you do commit to it in that ridiculous way that you guys and I do, we will find more than we realize. We will find elements of that freedom that will, it will make it. It will all. It's very likely that we'll end up dying too early, I think.
I think also if you are willing to constantly examine things, to be thoughtful and really reflecting, then there's a sense of ongoing change. I don't know if I can resolve what Heraclitus and the others were arguing about. The quantum physicists also say everything is all happening at one time, but we're experiencing it as a continuum of moments, and we can stay very much stuck or static and almost repeating moments on autopilot. I actually call that the syndicated life. It's like you want to turn on the Cosby Show 1987 and see the Huxtable family, and like everything is exactly where you predict it's going to be. They're wearing the clothes you can think about. They're going to interact in the ways that play out certain dynamics of relationships and patriarchy and matriarchy and structure of a family. And you can depend on it. There's people that want to go on vacation to the exact same spot every year, and they kind of want to have the same vacation. Like there might have been a really good one when they were 18 years old or 5 years old or 30 years old, but there's a moment, and then they're just trying to repeat the moment. And then change is threatening and terrifying because you won't have that moment. So there isn't that security of kind of going for syndication. And the opposite of syndicated life for me is creative life. And they're just two different paradigms that many people seem to be dividing the way in which they approach their life. Creative life isn't interested in continuing to repeat something that happened before. If anything, is really aware that when it happens again, you're never as thrilled as the first time. With creative life, you are aware that it isn't the same river twice, and so why bother trying to get back in that river? Like, go do something else. Like, now I'm going to climb a mountain, and now I'm going to go hug an animal, and now I'm going to think about philosophy, but I'm not going to keep trying to get back to one thing and repeat it again, because it isn't going to repeat again. And I just want to do something new and follow new questions that take me in different directions, and put it together in different ways. Like you were saying with freedom, like there's a sense of like seeking liberation, that we can be liberated in how we think. We can be liberated in how we interact with each other. We don't have to be limited to certain assumptions about how we're going to treat other people or be treated. We can be liberated in how we show up and dress, what our fashion is. but I think a lot about relationships and how people are interacting with one another and how we're interacting with the environment and the world. And, you know, I'm seeking the liberation of those things where we would do less harm, where things would progress or evolve. And as you caught, I'm hopeful. I'm cautiously optimistic that positive change is possible. And for me, that means death would always come too soon, because it's an unfinished project. I mean, reality is such an unfinished project. And I know no matter what moment, 100 years from now or tomorrow, it would be cut off midstream. So many things are unknown, and I'm not sure where they're going to land. And I'm not sure what the afterlife is. You know, I don't know exactly, and that's part of what's in the reach. You know, I used to ask if there's a God a lot, and now I don't need to ask that, because it's okay that I don't know. I can just know that it feels like there's something bigger. I hope that reincarnation is part of it, and that we get a chance to keep knowing one another and sort of hanging out with different souls that we really groove on, and learning and having different experiences. But I have no assurance of that. There's no concrete evidence in any direction. There's just what we think sounds right to our way of thinking and feeling. So yeah, I think a lot about what consciousness can mean and what's possible while we are here, because we don't know when it's going to be over. And true liberation is like taking that on completely. And that's what it has in common with existentialism. You were saying, ultimately, it seems like your philosophy is becoming very existential. And I like that existentialism is like, well, ultimately it's the self. Ultimately, it's up to one's own perception and one's own behavior. You can't point the finger outwardly. You have to take responsibility. But I do so with more optimism than bleakness. I do think by taking responsibility, there's the opportunity for people to behave in a much more kind fashion, to make a decision, to approach the world with kindness. And everything would change if people did that, because economics would not be as important. A big car would not be as important. You know, 5 houses is not important if the goal is just kindness. Then the distribution of wealth makes more sense than the hoarding by 1% or 10% of the population. Many things would change just by saying love or compassion or kindness was the guiding principle. So for me, that's part of the philosophy that drives me. It's like, well, how can I be liberated enough to live in that way, if that's what I believe to be good and true? How can I make my life align with it? And how does my poetry and songs, how can it express that in a way that's interesting to me as a poet and as a musician?
There's a lot that, I mean, it's funny, you just basically defined the way that generally existentialism is understood. The idea of freedom and responsibility is one of the key, the idea would be the vertigo of freedom and responsibility. To know the classic little tale is the person sitting at the top of a mountain, facing a precipice, facing what would be a sure death, and at that point in time realizing, feeling vertigo, because they realize that the choice of jumping or not jumping is entirely down to them. That realization makes that person exist in the most authentic way, which is kind of what you were describing, the idea that by taking on that responsibility, you become as a person, a self, and you start to live authentically, or authentically as, you know, so it's a very, very strong fundamental sort of basis for living authentically, which is one of the key goals of existentialism, the idea of what is it to live authentically. Yeah, great points. Yeah, I mean, what I wanted to say is that one thing, one of the challenges with this freedom and this responsibility that comes with it, but with the freedom itself, with the rejection of the syndicated that you were explaining before, is that there are, on the one hand, there are the fears that you know, perhaps we are at this stage, fear is a lot less of an obstacle than it used to be, but we encounter other people's fears, and though they can be very violent and very vicious, and I have experienced that quite a lot recently, and it's interesting. There's a lot of violence, you know, like not physical necessarily, but although you know, you could probably get that quite easily, but mainly the the violence, the violent way in which this proposal of freedom is rejected is an interesting thing. But on the other hand, more importantly, with the challenge for oneself, as one kind of rejects the syndicated and embraces the creative, is that there is an aspect of loss, which you were talking about before in my song. So loss, and perhaps it makes me rethink this loss that you were talking. Is this a loved one? Is this the mirror or whatever? But it perhaps is just loss. There is a pain there. There isn't just, there's a pain of loss that comes with, because the person that insists on the syndicated might kind of, by way of denial, might actually achieve that sense of repetition, artificial sense of repetition, right? That they're going for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But when you reject it consciously, and you consciously embrace this project of freedom, there is loss and there is a pain that comes with it. And it's being able to, one of the challenges, and I think something that helps me personally a lot, that music helps me a lot with, is being able to feel that pain, being able to, it's kind of this safe stage for you to experience all of the feelings that some of us find a lot harder to experience in real life, because you feel out of control, you feel, emotion is difficult for me in real life, but in music, it's there all the time.
Mm.
I'm not saying this is very healthy, but it's it is what it is. And I think in terms of understanding that that you gain a lot with embracing that freedom, but there is a big sacrifice that goes with it. It's the acceptance of loss and the need to grieve for the rest of your life. You're no longer a child. You can no longer believe that you can turn on the TV the next week at the same time, and you will experience the same thing, because you've gone through it too many times and it just doesn't work. So it's time to grow up and face loss.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think those that listen to us also are given permission to go into that emotion, even if they don't intellectually know if it lines up exactly with the emotion of the writer and the singer, the musicians. It evokes emotion and strong emotion, for other people to hear the music. And I think it allows a lot of people, feeling is hard, it's messy, it can be very overwhelming. And our society, modern society, is so deeply out of balance, the feelings of loneliness and loss, the inability to process grief. We can't handle death. We don't really have good rituals or customs in our world very much anymore that help us to deal with loss or change or death. And it all gets pent up. It's just bottled. It's just held somewhere. And I think that's why the fear grows to be so immense. You said, you were countering people's fear and how large it is, how violent it can be. And we're seeing a large swing across the world back towards a lot of totalitarian states, a lot of people surrendering their free will to become believers under certain systems, whether those are political or religious or both, but a lot of very extremist thinking and behavior led by powerful, charismatic people that just say, follow this. This is the syndicated path to how you want to feel. Turn off all thought. Just follow me. I've already done all the thinking. You just show up and I'm going to put a gun in your hands, or I'm going to put the right book in your hands. And that's going to be all you need to know. I'm going to let you know what actions to take. This path is going to let you know what house to buy, what neighborhood to live in, how to vote, where to send your children to for school. Everything is figured out for you. So don't worry. The fear of the creative life, you can just put that to rest. You're not going to have to think anything for yourself. We're going to have it all solved for you. But it creates, it's not human. We're not robots. We're not meant to shut down our ability to think or to sort through things for ourselves. And I think so we see this eruption of really dysfunctional behavior because people can't process emotion very well. our cultures are not processing it, individuals are not processing it. We're not in a very healthy place in this zeitgeist. This period of time is one in which people are very overwhelmed. And I think artists give us permission to have a little bit of borrow from their willingness to feel it. And it lets some of the pressure out of the system, you know, because things are just getting more and more and more intense inside people. And art can open that up. Like you were saying, you wanted to go into the philosophy and find how to open it up. And I think that's what I hope art continues to help people do, whether it's, you know, painting or sculpture or music or cinema, that we can help people to have a wider range of experiences that are comfortable and feel possible. Whereas if you just take it on without anything as a buffer, it can feel too overwhelming. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we do with music is we design a stage for people to stand in. People are not watching us on stage. They are. We kind of build up a stage for them to be able to feel those emotions, to be able to decompress, to be able to. People realize on some level that this dehumanization that you're talking about is very real. This is an idea that we've been mocking for the whole duration of postmodernism. You know, it's this grand narrative of the human, but there is a thing called dehumanization, and it's as damaging as it's meant to be. The thing is, you know, we're just now beginning to realize what it is. And I've been reading a lot about dehumanization. There's a book I'm reading called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire, a Brazilian author. It's a classic but he talks about how oppression dehumanizes the oppressed and the oppressor. So there's the imbalances of power dehumanize. And I'm reading a lot about that kind of thing, because I'm also kind of reading Hegel quite a bit now. And Hegel has this theory of the master and the slave. And it doesn't just apply to people. I think it applies to concepts as well. So in order for you to understand the concept, you kind of need to understand, just to make it simple, you need to understand the negation of the concept, the opposite or the different. And that concept will be determined, that idea will be determined by its opposition to other concepts. That's also kind of, there's other theories and language that are like that. But for people, kind of the same thing applies. This is kind of partly what the to understand the progression of consciousness and knowledge and human history, all of it based on the same sort of model. And when there is those imbalances of power and not allowing those concepts to determine themselves properly, because they're not put in opposition to something else, the balance isn't there, and thus, so the concept and its negation need to be kind of at the same level to be able to determine each other. In fact, it gets more complicated because actually negation is coming from within the concept. It emerges, and history kind of is a constant birth of opposites, you know, from the original sort of concept. And the concept is determined by its opposition, and then there's a new concept that emerges, a more advanced sort of concept that emerges through this opposition. We need to kind of start thinking about these things, because the humanization is very real, and we cannot determine ourselves as human beings if we cannot oppose ourselves to in an equal sort of balance. We all suffer. We all suffer.
Yeah. And that kind of touches on, you know, themes that I keep coming back to in my writing as well, is that not only that theme of freedom and finding yourself that I kind of already touched on, but like that feeling that combating that dehumanization is becoming more human, and maybe if not individualistic, maybe that's not the right word, but yeah, becoming more of an individual and less of the hive mentality that a lot of people end up falling into.
Yeah. This is the thing. I also wanted to say that actually within our retro thing, that we share. The retro thing, this whole postmodern sort of thing that we fallen in love with, we crave that we never knew, and so on. There's a darker side to it, and it's important that we bring this philosophical content and this spirituality that we're bringing, because the other side of this is fascism itself. And I was just reading about, for the first time ever I've read about this fash wave. Have you come across this fash wave, which is
luckily not often, in very small spurts. Like when I was first getting the synthwave, there's a sect of synthwave called fash wave, and I'm like, oh god. And luckily I haven't seen that take over the scene at all. In fact, I've kind of seen it disappear to the background, like most people I've interacted with in the scene, and most artists I've met and interacted with are not any part of that and don't want any part of that. Because if they did, they'd have a problem with me. I mean, anyway.
Yeah, of course.
So, but
what I'm trying to say is that that's part of what we're doing. That nostalgia, that postmodern thing has this classic neoconservative element to it.
Yeah.
And that needs to be dealt with this philosophical kind of spirituality. Because without it, well, this is dealt with in many ways. But I think we can see, as Juliet was saying, throughout the world, there's this massive reaction to these times. It's a reaction to the times that defines the times. It's a reaction to this saturation, this lack of not being able to be controlled by a central narrative. This is the thing that we embrace, and we are fascinated by, that freedom that we get from not having to be so in awe of our idols, to be able to question them as well, to be able to not the times of the great rock and roll stars are dead now. I think rock stars are almost entirely a joke nowadays. It's an embarrassment really to be a rock star. That's a good thing, but at the same time, that doesn't allow all the fans to hold on to the genius. Where's the genius?
Yeah.
Well, there has to be a genius. There has to be a god. There has to be a genius. Otherwise, how are we gonna control things?
Right. I mean, well, maybe that's the good side of the breaking down, the end of the era of the rock stars. I think people are realizing a lot of that is crap, and maybe that's one of that's one of the upsides of the whole social media thing that we're in, is those barriers between the people who are, our so-called celebrities or so-called rock stars and us are completely broken down. Like, everyone can have a social media account, everyone can have a TikTok account, and so those barriers really don't mean anything. And hopefully that has also established the democratization of creativity, the fact that you and me, we have the tools to produce high quality art and music at our fingertips like no other time, no other era in history have people have the access to those tools. You used to have thousands of dollars in studio time in order to go in and produce music. Now that's completely wiped away, and it's democratized creativity, and hopefully that's democratized that feeling that you're talking about of having to put creatives on this pedestal that they're geniuses and that they're gods. It's like, no, the genius is everywhere. It's just
exactly yes. The genius is everywhere.
Yeah,
the genius is everywhere. Yes.
Each person has their genius. Each person has insight that's deep and profound based on their own life experience, and we can turn toward what gives us life, what gives us energy, where passion and energy just become kind of effortless for us, instead of just repeating things that don't do anything for us because society or something has dictated it's the right path. And I think that's part of that self-liberation, almost existential in a way, like the belief that all of us have access to great wisdom and inspiration. We can do something with it, and we're going to all do lots of different kinds of things with it. Some people are going to become amazing athletes, and some people are going to become amazing parents, and there's all different ways to manifest just pure genius, like wonderful, wonderful insight about how to be things. If we can celebrate that and not become afraid just because we don't have kind of outside, you know, people so far beyond us that seem unattainable that we're going to worship, whether they're, you know, from the priesthood or they became the rock stars, or, you know, the major athletes. Like, we have these celebrities, and what we do with that is, it's pretty weird. But if we could all believe in ourselves and our ability to touch into that with each other, people would be so much more driven to create things rather than just sitting around trying to find the next thing to pay attention to that's outside themselves.
I think what's happening is that it's the thing, you know, this technology that allows us to do what Remy was describing, you know, that has never happened before. People like us have realized between this and social media that the potential for abandoning the genius outside and looking at the genius within and promoting it, showing it, being it, it's unbelievable. This is the most amazing time to be an artist, to be a person in search for freedom in the history of humanity. It's absolutely incredible. I am so inspired by these possibilities, and I've never felt as free as I feel right now as an artist. I feel like SNS Sensation is perhaps less popular than Heartbreak and other projects that I had before that were great as well and very liberating and so on. But in terms of my own internal process, this is really me embracing a new stage in a new level of freedom that is only made possible by this whole kind of world of social media and home studios, you know. But obviously, this requires a certain predisposition, a certain spirituality, I don't know, a certain something, a certain experience in life that allows us to open up our minds and really embrace these incredible possibilities, because social media is telling everyone, you be your own genius, but a lot of people are being it for someone else, and they feel more observed than ever before. They feel more imprisoned in their friendships and their social circles than ever before, you know, and people kind of those oppressed that are identified with the oppressor become an oppressor, act like an oppressor, enhancing that sense of vigilance that social media brings to those people that have not been able to discern what the power of it is.
Yeah.
Perhaps also there's an element of a lot of these people are younger, which is partly to do with life and how people mature. But on the other hand, we've seen other things before, and now we see this happening, and it's like, what an incredible opportunity. We can compare it to something else, but if you grow up with this in there, it's a bit like 1984, you know, the Big Brother.
Yeah, but I guess let's transition because we should start kind of wrapping the conversation. But this segues kind of well into a way we can kind of close out the conversation. How are you starting to manifest your genius? Like, what's next for SNS? Like, what are you working on? You were kind of telling me when we were talking back and forth on Instagram, you were telling me about some of the stuff you were listening to and some of the influences you were starting to take in, and I was getting excited. I'm like, ooh, because like I want to hear what SNS influenced by those artists we were talking about like would sound like. So I guess just tell me like what's in your what are you cooking up next?
But my next stage of liberation is kind of doing away with conservative voices that got within me when I embraced the retro. And the way that I embraced the retro was very anarchistic at the time. This was 10 years ago or so. And it was about this whole narrative of the new is no longer new, is now old, and it feels old to try to be new. And that was fine at the time. I thought that was an interesting point to make. But now I kind of got hung up on that a bit. And I feel there are voices that are not my own voice there. And by talking to you and a few other friends and musicians that have encouraged me to open up my mind and so on, I started to realize that I don't need to love a genre to learn from it, you know, and I don't need to be a fan to learn from it. So some of the new music that I'm hearing now, I'm researching quite deeply is, my idea is to kind of incorporate a modern, so-called modern sound. Modern doesn't know what that means, but what it means is like freer. And I think that's what the good thing, that's the best meaning that you can bring into the word modern. Modern is you have so much, have so much access to so many things that using it all is modern. So what I'm listening to at the moment is some of it is dark synth, cyberpunk and that kind of thing, which it has that metal-esque sort of energy that I've had from before, but instead of being classic metal, it's this synth kind of metal thing.
Yeah,
and I there's some aspects of that I could bring into my songwriting, which would be quite different from what you generally hear in dark synth. But you get some of those sounds. I'm really interested to see what happens there. But I've also been listening to a bit of bro step, which is the American version of dubstep. And there's some really interesting sounds there. Again, composition-wise, a bit more, not particularly attracted to me, but sonically and the way that the sonic ideas, the way that they address fragmentation. I love the fragmented aspect of it, how extremities, I think the dubstep thing that this bro step thing emerges from is actually very, very different. It's lovely music, very, but overall it's not doing what Skrillex and all these people are doing. Is they're really kind of maximizing the violence of the fragment, and I'm really interested in that. Yeah. So I don't know what could happen with that. But then I've been also listening to other things. I'm just opening, I'm learning a lot about what's been going on outside my 80s bubble, and listening to a lot of trap music, and hyperpop has been basically this whole thing has stemmed from hyperpop. Nice. Discovering hyperpop was like, what is this? What's going on? This is amazing. What is going on? This is punk, more punk than punk ever was. Yeah. And we talked about it, but where is this music coming from? And that's when you come up with, you discover dubstep, bro step, and trap, and all the sub-genres, K-pop, and whatever. But obviously, that's kind of what's happening. So I don't know what's going to sound like. On the other hand, I can't seem to shake off this need for to kind of channel my dark wave, cold wave kind of aspect, and I listen to that quite a lot. So we'll see what happens with all of those things. At the end of the day, you have to sit down and write. But I'm using the vital instrument a bit more, which you heard in Same River Twice. But now I'm going to push it to the next level, and very exciting times, I think, in terms of again, as Juliet was saying, what's next? Creative, discovery. And we'll see.
Yeah.
But absolutely. And I'm really. What are you listening to?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you come up with next, like where your sound's going to go. It's really cool hearing those what you're talking about, those influences coming in. Some of those things, especially like hyper pop. I definitely have a few on our list of pop portal artists that we're going to review in the coming months on this podcast. There's definitely a few hyper pop artists on there. I'm really interested from what I've heard so far to like delve into that world, because it's a world I'm only kind of on the fringes aware of right now. So looking forward to hearing more of that. But this has been
I'm looking forward to hearing what you say when you. I want to hear what your reaction is to it. I'm really looking forward to that. Yeah.
It is. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be interesting. But this has been fascinating talking to you. It always is, my friend. It's always very, very cool, very eye opening, and just delving into these topics with you and shooting the shit. It's been awesome. Everybody go check out SNS Sensation Instagram at SNS_discopop_noir. But also you can just Google search SNS Sensation and find him that way. He's fairly active on his YouTube and on his on social media and stuff like that. But if philosophical existentialist themes and kind of super like artsy kind of stuff is for you, definitely check him out. Sebastian, it's been awesome talking to you, my friend.
Amazing, great energy. I love this chat. It was really energetic.
Yeah, it's good to get to interact with you in synchronous time.
Yes.
In synchronous time for these few moments. I've been, watching your interviews with each other, and I feel like I've been kind of a part of the conversation, but it now directly, all three of us getting to talk is also, it's a nice opportunity. Thanks for making time for
awesome.
us.
Thank you. No, thanks. That was really enjoyable. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.